Of the German Archaeological Institute in Berlin. As a field archaeologist, Dr. Boroffka's work spans much of Eurasia and the Middle East, with a special focus on the Bronze Age and Iron Ages in Southeastern Europe and Central Asia, including research on environmental history and resource exploitation. Today, he will give us an insight into the current work of the German Institute in Eurasia in a lecture entitled Interaction between Urban Societies and Mobile Peoples, some highlight examples.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you, of course, St. John and Svetlana for putting together this wonderful exhibition and this wonderful conference. Very informative. St. John actually informed me that there would be a specialist and non-specialist audience, so I will not go into too much depth, also presenting rather a broad spectrum of projects we are or have been working on. Not all of them. I think the active projects are marked here, and you can see the circle encompassing roughly what I will be talking about at the moment. Not all of it, but some of it. More specifically, I will be talking about, I will be starting in the Bronze Age, especially with this side here and these two sides here. Moving on to the Iron Age, all the way up to Kazakhstan, southern Siberia, or yes, and back to Kazakhstan again, and then going back to the antique high civilizations or urban civilizations, if you like. Just so you know roughly the itinerary we are going through in time and in space. Starting off with Gorno-Tepe, well known to anybody working in Central Asia on the Bronze Age, of course. This is a very large urban site from the end of the 3rd millennium BC. Our institute is participating in the Russian Turkmen excavations since 2010. I will not be talking about Gorno South, which you can see in the satellite image here, which is slightly later, still Bronze Age though. But I will be talking a little bit about this evidently urban structure. You can see an inner palace, fortified, with high walls, corridors inside, towers outside, an inner city, second quadrangle there, and an outer city, each walled again. Only the inner city has towers again, and the outer wall is most probably a boundary and not a fortification wall. Far to the west, you can perhaps trace some traces of the old river here. On the other side of the river, an enormous necropolis, previously excavated by Sarianidi, the head of excavations until his death in 2013, and Nadezhda Dubova from Moscow, with an excavated number of, I think, almost 2,000 burials. Right now we know, in fact, roughly 6,000 burials, because the children are missing in the necropolis. They are inside the city walls, in below floors or inside walls of the normal buildings. Sorry, in the wrong thing. Okay. As I mentioned, this is definitely an urban structure. You saw the scale on the previous slide, roughly 1 kilometer in diameter for the late 3rd millennium. This is quite comparable to some of the cities in the Near East. And at various stages, this is an intermediate one. You can see it in the aerial photo with complex structures, architecture, something we would call civilization, water pipes in clay. These are probably for drainage, and complex mud brick architecture. Now this doesn't seem to have very much to do with nomads. And indeed, we have local pottery production in enormous masses, wheel-made or wheel-finished, let's say, with sometimes, this is an exceptional one, I will have to admit, enormous pottery kilns. You can see the scale, this is 1 meter, so it's roughly 3 meters wide, and the length of this kiln is 8 meters. This is indeed the largest one in Gorno, and quite extraordinary, to be honest. I mentioned the necropolis on the other side of the river to the west. Inside the outer city limits, besides the necropolis which you see on the old excavation photo here, inside the city limit there are what we would call royal graves with quite astounding materials. I have put in one slide only here. Some of the facades are decorated with mosaics from colored stones, sometimes fired, as our Moscow colleagues have analyzed. Some contain faience as well. You can see some of the insets in detail here with quite an extraordinary imagery for the 3rd millennium BC, late 3rd millennium BC. And precious metal vessels. This is one of a hoard underneath the floor of one of the royal graves, which contained altogether 12 vessels of silver and gold. Escaped as the robbers. All the graves are robbed. And at the moment I think we have 6 royal graves with such carts, and obviously the Mesopotamian connection is clearly there. You will know these from Susa, for example, or the Ur royal burials. Generally we have copper alloy metallurgy. Around 12% of the objects are tin bronze. One single object is iron, according to analysis by the British Museum Meteoritic. And we obviously see complex jewelry, like this beautiful flower pin at the top, made of bronze, turquoise, this is the white stuff, and gold foil. I have just mentioned the Mesopotamian connections, which are further augmented by the find of, I think at the moment, 3 cylinder seals. This is the only one with an inscription, unfortunately unreadable. As well as connections to the Indus regions. These are both finds from the Gonor city itself. And where I come into the steppe, in the surroundings, but also inside the city, in some rooms, we find this quite different pottery from what I showed you before, the wheel-made stuff. This is handmade, stamp ornamented, what would normally be called Andronovo. Since we're at the end of the 3rd millennium here, this is a little bit early, but I prefer to call it, perhaps in the way some of my American colleagues call it, stamped steppe pottery, or steppe handmade pottery. We also find, although as you see here, we are far from any mountains that might contain ore. We also find local practiced metallurgy. This is where perhaps the steppe connection becomes quite important, because in previous projects further up, if you remember the second map I showed, in Kanab, for example, we have studied mines, in this case purely for tin. These are quartz veins with castrites, which you can see the scale here are geologists standing as a scale. These shafts go almost vertically, following directly the veins. We excavated them down to 16 meters, after which groundwater broke in and we could not continue. They are obviously deeper. And mining settlements nearby, where this is materials from, where obviously arsenical copper was brought, while the drops are already tin bronze. So the alloying took place on site. Obviously the usual mining tools. As you can see by the pottery, this is mining exclusively carried out by the steppe mobile pastoralists, let's say. Quite interesting that the city urban, let's say, agriculturalists, as they are usually called, are obviously not practicing mining. While at Kanab, we're in the middle of the flat steppe, and even today it is still a bit of a riddle how the ancient miners identified the tin, probably by places, but they did find the veins. Visually, there is no possibility to observe them different from the other quartz veins. They contain up to 9.8% tin, which is very, very much for anybody who knows metallurgy. Further east, Mouchiston on the map, we have the same people, again, mining way up in the mountains at almost 3,000 meters above sea level, 2,900 something. And this time not going vertically into the mountain. These are Soviet time exploration trenches to see where the veins are actually going. And you can see here, or in the plan, the yellow and the dark yellow marked galleries. They go at least 35 meters straight into the mountain in rather unorganized galleries, but obviously in a very, very intensive and at least two-phase exploration. You can see here, the darker yellow is the older radiocarbon dated to the late 3rd millennium, while the lighter color is dated to the 2nd millennium, first half of the 2nd millennium. Might mention in passing that this is also there is another aspect to this special site. You can see some of the primary ore, actually secondary ore, it's the hydrologically changed ore, which consists of malachite mainly. There is also lazurite, of course, and something called mouchistonite, which is a tin mineral. If you smelt this ore, you get 10% bronze directly. We did the experiment in Freiburg at that time. So this is actually a bronze mine, not a copper or a tin mine.
Wow.
Moving on to the Iron Age, Peter Hommel has already showed some of this. One of the excavations, together with Zaibot in northern Kazakhstan, was directed on a kurgan, or what appeared to be a kurgan at least, first view from the outside, and turned out to be something without burial, but as Peter Hommel already mentioned this morning, with a very complex structure. A first stage with ramps and tunnels, posts, stands, an enclosing ditch. A second phase in which the whole thing was more or less buried, provided with a surrounding vallum, let's say, and covered with birch bark. The third stage, where the whole thing was buried in several layers of alternating black earth and clay. And the final phase, when the whole thing was covered and a red clay pyramid was built right on top, which must have been visible from very, very far away. There is no burial, at least not from the time. It's radiocarbon dated to the 5th, maybe 6th century BC. So we are in Scythian time. There is a later AD burial put onto the mount, but that should not interest us here. Evidently, we are talking about something more ritual, a meeting place, something visible far away, and something we have already seen a couple of times that also pertains to several of the kurgans. I will go on to Barsuchi Loch, also already partly seen, I think, in Peter's, no? Okay. Another burial, burial mound where the geophysics, Marina is of course right, this should definitely be done, had already shown that inside the apparently round mound we actually have a rectangular structure. It is built up of turf sods, and I would like to mention, St. John has already put the question, they are destroying the landscape over quite serious sizes, and it takes generations to recover. And I would like to mention that Renato Roller many years ago already proposed that possibly these kurgans, especially when they are built of sods, actually symbolize the pasture this very person was master over. I think that's quite an important aspect. These mounds are actually his land, or symbolize his land. Inside, again, we have a very complex, this time burial chamber indeed. You can see photograph from the excavation here, the normal wooden log cabin, underground, covered by several layers of birch bark, clay layers fired at the end before finally being buried under the pasture he was taking with him. I will move on to Arjan. I will not dwell so long on this because when doing the presentation I didn't know yet that Kostya was also here and would present Arjan. I imagined he could be here, so I will not dwell on too much on things. Just some images which he didn't show of the outside areas. Actually, in his picture also it was visible. You can see some of them were excavated over here, and some, okay, it's not marked here yet, some over here. In the discussion it was already mentioned, these are possibly not all simultaneous. It's a little bit difficult to date stratigraphically because they're not directly linked. You can see they are directly under the grass. And they contain, as Kostya already mentioned, burnt animal bones, mostly. What got a bit lost in the discussion was that he, in Russian at least, said, and what might be important is that these animal bones were not burnt in these circles. They were brought already burnt. There are no traces of fire directly there. They were brought from somewhere else where the fireplaces and the cooking must have taken place. Yes, these are pictures, of course, of the main royal grave and the horse burials, which he didn't show. He did show this one, and he did show this one. This is actually the partly collapsed roof. Just to give you an impression, some of these objects are in the exhibition, but not all of them, so I will show you some of the gold. And although he stressed the difference between the women on the left side of the program and the men on the right side, we see that at least the royal couple is not quite identically, but on the same level equipped. This is the neck ring of the man and the neck ring of the lady, of quite different ages. In the discussion about the child burial just in front of this chamber, it was not mentioned the man was very old, had been bedbound for many years, so he could definitely not have fathered the child if it was his. The genetics have not been conclusive. His wife was very much younger, or at least the lady who accompanied him. We see the same in part of the other equipment, the man's dagger with a beautiful lion gold inlays, and the lady's dagger, a little bit simpler, but in an absolutely comparable, difficult technique, let's say. Just the same belt buckles, which you can see in the exhibition here, I think. The belt of the man and the jewelry of the lady. I will not insist on this too much. Perhaps just to mention, of course, the goret cannot be lacking, and perhaps for the archers, we see the arrows preserved here, at least partly, were in fact painted in quite different motives. The arrowheads, especially from the royal burial, not from the general sequence, one of these is in the exhibition here, are evidently not for use in normal battle or hunting. You would not use that kind of arrow with a complex gold inlay and that kind of thing. And some textiles. I may mention, in this is one burial where we also have, of course, indications of hemp, which the Scythians are known to have used in, let's say, ritual narcoticizing themselves. I will also not go into the double burial of the ladies on the right, which Kostya has already shown as well. I will move on to another kurgan, of which Peter showed just the geophysics, I think. Joan Tobé, it has not been published yet, in the Semi-Reche, which is roughly southeastern Kazakhstan, not too far from the Chinese border actually. And besides the geophysics, which show you this round feature, let's say, it was not really completely excavated, only some soundings. But what is interesting is that this round feature actually turns out to be a very well constructed road. You can see a section here with massive boulders below, finer stones on top, and what's quite interesting, and what especially the people here in Britain might know, a convex surface, which is extremely important for roads to work. If it is flat, it will be worn out very quickly. And of course, the stones on the sides. This is probably, or possibly, one of the oldest roads with a convex surface we know at the moment. I know they were used in the Roman Empire and, of course, rediscovered here in Britain during the Industrial Revolution. Before that, roads were usually flat and got worn very, very quickly. One of the finds from the kurgan are these bowls, pictured here just in situ. I hope you can recognize the shape anyway, because I will come back to that in a minute. Okay, speed up a little bit. Going back south, a few years ago, together with the colleague Leonid Svechkov from Tashkent, we finished the excavation. He had actually started it before, of a fortress at a site called Kurgan Zol, ash mound, if you like. It's not an ash mound, actually. Viewed from the valley, you can see the fortress lying up here. You can't see it actually here, but you can see the plan on the right. The interior was completely excavated, and the reason there are no towers on this side is simply because on this side there was no need for them. Not to talk about space. Yes, okay, the names I have given to these rooms, kitchen, dining room, commander's rooms, and so on, are of course a little bit fantasy, but not quite without reason. The kitchen is the only one where we have a fireplace, and you can see this breakthrough there. This is actually not a doorway, it is a service hatch halfway up the wall, in which things could be passed over to the larger room to the east. Just very few images of the site itself. I'm not sure if you can recognize it. There's a dotted line here, which is the window going through the gatekeeper. Inside the floor of the kitchen we have sunken storage jars, what you would call in Greek pitos. Of course, in Uzbekistan this is kum. And just an image showing this service hatch I mentioned. It is not a doorway, it's far too high for that. And the wonderful loopholes closed up later. In fact, they are probably not loopholes. They are probably for light and drying the walls inside after building. The walls are 3 meters thick, and if you think of a narrow channel like this, it is not going to work as a loophole. It will have to be funnel shaped. Otherwise you can shoot only at the enemy coming directly at the loophole. But they are conventionally called loopholes. Coming back to the pottery I mentioned from Joan Tobé, you can see exactly the same shapes here, especially this one maybe. In Joan Tobé they are wheel made, and we also find them in the famous kurgan from Issyk, where they were not especially remarked due to the golden man who was also in the kurgan. and which are definitely not pre-Greek. So both Juan Tobé and Issyk cannot date earlier than the end of the 4th century BC. Akishev, at the time he excavated Issyk, thought it was older, but since we have Greek pottery here, we can hardly put the Greek pottery before the arrival of the Greeks. Here's an overview from roughly the commandant's quarters. The gate is here. We did not open it completely because of danger of collapse. The fort was attacked. The garrison obviously survived because they rebuilt the wall just to the right here. Yes, some pretty analogies. This type of water transport is introduced also by the Greeks only. And the exceptional find here, quite unique in Central Asia, is the clay bathtub, which at the time gave a lot of speculations about Roxana bathroom, future wife of Alexander the Great. Another thing I would like to mention, why this is in here, is that we have pottery, obviously of original Greek type with the glaze. We have the local production, real made, and we also have local handmade copies. In front of the fortress, in fact, there were traces of a village, and we also had more, although maybe not more than 10%, I think a bit less, around 8%, of handmade pottery, which is not really what we would expect of the Greeks. During excavation, we did remark this, and we did, of course, document this, but we didn't really think very much about it. Later on, when our zoologists did the analysis of the animal bones and told us, well, at least some of the garrison of these small fort were eating horses. We remember that, of course, in Alexander's troops, there were mercenaries, foreign auxiliaries, Massagetai, very nicely shown right on the eastern edge in Tim's original map, Herodotus. So possibly we have a mixed garrison of Greeks with some Scythoid, Massagetai, guarding the rear of Alexander at this fortress. And of course, in a museum, we should also think about reconstruction. What surprised us, although we knew we were in the Hellenistic period, was that one of the huge posts of half-meter diameter next to the commander's rooms turned out to have been felled in 328 BC. Alexander's campaigns were in 329 and 328, so presumably, as Curtius Rufus mentions, this is one of the 7 forts Alexander himself said, build it here. And to finish, I hope the technician is there, we can see a short reconstruction of what this fort must have looked like in life.
treating us to this fabulous journey to one of the many spectacular sites that you're working on. Questions?
Dr. Boroffka, the possible size of the garrison of this particular fort?
Not really. The living quarters are, well, let's say the buildings from mud brick are few. This is why in the reconstruction you saw tents as well. We are, of course, in Central Asia, a very warm area now. It was probably more humid at the time, because in the osteological record we also have wild boar and deer, so there must have been riverine forest at least. It's not existing now. But how many people there were there, we don't really know. The whole thing is a small fort. The interior diameter is 35 meters, plus minus a little bit, so it's quite small. And probably mixed, as I mentioned. But how many people there were really there, we don't know. Basically, if you live in Central Asia today, you can live outside practically all of the year. So the houses don't give a real estimate.
I have to say, what you showed about the step mining, the complexity of step mining, and this extraction of ore from quite deep mines, reminds me a little bit of the situation that is coming out from Arabia, southeastern Arabia now, where you have these very, very, industrialized mining sites and ore exploitation sites in the late Bronze, early Iron Age, which were totally unexpected, which change our perception of early metallurgy in that area, which clearly is operating seasonally.
Yes.
And I wonder if there's something, whether you think this is also a seasonal activity that's going on.
For Mushiston, the high mountain site, I wouldn't dare to say anything, because we found two contemporary Bronze Age settlements in the wider surroundings, let's say. Basically, probably because simply at this height, erosion is so fast, either they are deeply buried or they have gone completely. On the other hand, in the steppe site, I didn't show this here, not to go into too much detail. We do have the mining site, which is roughly 1 kilometer from the shafts I showed, and this is definitely seasonal. We have, I think, 12 phases at least. What is interesting about the site, and what is usually buried a little bit in the publication, which is in German, so you will have to read it in that language, is that in spite of the fact that it is not with fixed installed housing, we have only fireplaces. The workshops are fixed with huge boulders and fireplaces and smelting installations inside, but these are fixed. But the fireplaces of the tents, presumably inside, if we look at modern ethnography, are always in the same place. So the general structure of this tent camp must always have been the same, which means, of course, a very fixed and almost rigid social structure of these miners who come there in whatever season they do come, and always put their tent in the same place. We have, I think, 12 such tent places or fireplaces, which are always with sterile layers in between the same place.
So the industrial scale of ore exploitation that implies also implies a good source of water and a lot of fuel.
Yes.
Can you say something about those resources?
Certainly. Right next to the mining settlement, we have the single stream, which even today bears water all year round. We have the same hammers and anvils as in the mines from the settlement. Well, in German it's Wermut, kind of brushy steppe vegetation we have there. We actually did experiments at the mines. It gives a very, very high heat. It is used today for winter heating, and you see huge piles of it on the houses of the people today, if they don't have gas provided by the state. It burns very fast, very high heat, but doesn't last very long. But it would be suited absolutely both for fire setting in the mines and for smelting.
But you need huge quantities of it.
Yes.
So of course that ties in perfectly to a steppe nomad economy.
Yeah,
because if
absolutely.
you've got mobility, then you can move over large distances to basically harvest the natural resource.
Yes.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
So, thank you, Nick, for this wide overview of your works and the excavations in the day. I would like, perhaps because you had no time to comment this, that the comparison between the so-called urban societies of the first millennium or at the turn of the era compared to the real nomads and mobile population is not exactly the same situation as it was in the 3rd millennium BCE. Even in Central Asia, what we call urban is not so urban compared to the Levant, Middle East, and so and so. Gonur is quite an exception.
Yes.
And the steppe population was not so nomad. They had settlements, perhaps not settling for very long or as long as the others, but they were not riders and just to help the person less familiar.
Well, I would agree partly, let's say. Gonur is in a way an exception. If you know very well, Charkutan is comparable in size if you take the complete site. Togolok is quite comparable, I think, Togolok 1, which is not far from Gonur, in fact.
Yes, but I mean that they are much smaller than the usual Levant, Middle East, and Mesopotamia urbanization.
Well, it is not comparable to Ebla, if you mean that. Of course not. But for the steppe or for the steppe fringe, they are quite huge. One problem is, of course, that we don't know so many settlements. This is one problem we had with the mining settlement in Karnat for the mobile steppe population. You're quite right that they are not so nomad. That's why I say mobile steppe pastoralists. I don't say nomads. I don't think they are really nomadic. I think they have fixed routes. They are using spring, summer pastures, but they are not nomad in the sense that they are going all the way to the Caucasus or all the way to China. Definitely not. I don't believe that. It would be far too far to come back the next season to continue mining, for example. It is just not possible. So I would prefer to use perhaps a word that is not so often used now, but transhumans. Vertical or horizontal, whatever you like. So I agree with this totally.
They had some agriculture, no?
Yes. I didn't show that here. If we look at Kokcha, for example, which is also an Andronova site, we have irrigation channels, garden plots. They have a mixed economy, yes. Definitely.
Ник, в продолжение этой дискуссии, что получали взамен вот эти степные племена за свой металл, за олово, который они поставляли в цивилизации?
Do you have any suggestion, duration? What was this steppe nomadic or pastoralists gained in exchange for that team that they sent to that so-called urban centers?
This is of course a problem. As I've just mentioned, at least the people in the southern periphery, the steppe mobile people, were practicing mixed agriculture, mixed economy. Like Kokcha, this is in Khwarezm, just south of the Aral Sea. If you go into the Kazakh steppes, or even further north, as Kostya I'm sure knows, Chicha, we have zero agriculture. Absolute zero. The more recent research of David Anthony in Samara has proved the same, like also Krause in Olgino, and Kamiambar, they have no agriculture whatsoever. However, most of you know you can't live only on meat and milk. You need some carbohydrates. We have a few mentioned grain impressions on some pottery from the Andronovo region, but if we look at the pollen profiles in the nearby lakes, there is no cultivation. So either they are getting grain or something which works even today in the deserts like the Karakum or the Kizilkum, which I learned from my local colleagues, of course, is don't take money with you. Take ground flour, oil and sugar. Because with the money they can buy nothing in the desert. These are things they will buy only once a year when they come back to the towns. So I think they are getting agricultural products. In Gono we also have fruit. Some of the earliest cultivated fruit. Prunes, apples, pears, wine as well. It's difficult to prove, of course.
В таком случае, вот у скифов мы видим много амфор. Где здесь остатки хотя бы тары из этих центров у степных народов?
Are there any archaeological remains, or at least that vessels or things like that, in which they transported these grains, this fruit, these products?
Well, as even today we don't transport flour, for example, in vessels. We transport
It's
it in
just
sacks.
my bad word.
No. It's I understood also the Russian. Don't worry. You're translating quite correctly. And we don't find these sacks. Obviously, we will not find them. They can be leather. They can be textile. We have, of course, wool and probably also cotton production at this time. So this is not a problem. We have the animals in the osteological record. We have both horses and camels. Yes. So it's not a problem of transport. I think they are organic containers. Probably leather or textile, which we don't find. This is the big problem, of course. We do find, let's say in the Prioral or Zaural region, it's less evident, but there are one or two finds of faience, for example, which could come from the south. I don't know if you're familiar in Kazakhstan, of course, now, deep in Kazakhstan in the steppe, we find wheel-made pottery from the south. In Kent, for example, but not only. So at least some of the products could be stored in ceramic vessels. Just as the transport to the south, I don't think the people in Gonor, for example, were interested in this rather ugly Andronovo pottery. They were interested in what is inside. And this could be not only metal, it could also be, for example, honey. Very important prehistoric sweetener.
I think we have one question here, but shall we take, if it's directly related?
Is it directly related to what you just said?
Or is it?
Yeah. But the transportation, I'm sorry to speak again, but the in Gono, you have these Indus civilization-like amphorae also. So that sort of containers were used from the Harapan Indus Valley, were used towards the Gulf and towards Central Asia. The settlement of Shortuga is somewhere on the way. Links were there. And secondly, for the period of Khogansal, exactly the time of Alexander, there are the Khalili parchments, Aramaic parchments from Bactria, and they are mentioning wine production, and well-known wines. And so,
well, I mentioned wine in Gono already, cultivated wine. We have actually in some of the storage jars the crushed grapes at the bottom. So they are definitely producing wine themselves. And for the Indus jars, well, you know, our joint project has shown that the Gono pottery is local, even if the shape is like the Indus shape.
Yes, but it links.
Yeah.
They were made for transportation.
The links are there, yes.
Jars.
Yeah, it's a general question about the impact of the Bactria Margiana archaeological complex on the development of the pastoralist economy and society, and therefore leading into the nomadic and the relationship with the Far East, and how it actually, it seems to me that there's an impact of Bactria margiana on aspects of the developments in East Asia. Sorry. Thank you.
No, please continue.
No, it's okay.
Okay. Well, it's a little difficult to really define this. On the one hand, Mesopotamia is, of course, for example, does not have the tin. The steppe people are evidently not trading directly with Mesopotamia. If the tin is coming from here, which is still a slightly unsolved problem, then it is coming via the Bactro-Margiana people. Because Gornor, right out in what is today the desert, what used to be a fertile agricultural land, is basically what I would call, and the wealth they are accumulating in these gold, silver vessels, and lots of copper alloy, is obviously something they are taxing people going through, I think.
Yep.
Obviously there is both a Mesopotamian impact in Gornor, and the other way around. Probably at least some of the metal supply is going through there. We don't know about fruit and all the things we don't get archaeological traces, but they are probably there.
Yep.
The same for the steppe, of course. But the steppe is not directly in contact, I think, with Mesopotamia. It's via these people. I don't know, yesterday I think there was the question of the heart, and Henri Paul was a little bit careful. I think we can recognize, I've written an article, I'm sure he knows, we can recognize the Bactro-Margiana type of heart, which is different from what we usually see in Mesopotamia and Syria. It's a different shape and a different way of handling it.